Okay, we're going to come to order. Today is the Wednesday, December 17th, regular meeting of the Glendale Planning Commission. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Sheets.
Here.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Here.
Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Berman.
Here.
And Chair Kane.
Here. Report regarding posting of agenda, please.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on Wednesday, December 10th, 2008 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
All right. Would you please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, approval of minutes from the December 3rd meeting. Comments or corrections from anyone?
I move we accept the minutes.
I actually have a couple comments.
Okay.
On the fourth page under Chairperson Kane, and it had to do with the concept of precedent setting and so on. The way the minutes are written made it seem like I was saying that passing it could be precedent setting. What I was trying to say is that, frankly, it wouldn't be precedent setting for the reasons I pointed out. So I just want to emphasize we're not, because that's very important on variances in terms of each one being specific and so on. And farther down under item A of the motion, where we said that the traffic barrier will protect the residents and protect the property from sustaining major damage, that should be a little more parsed and should be, would work to potentially protect the property. With those two corrections, we have a motion. Could we have support?
Sure.
Motion and support. Call for the minutes, please. Roll for the motion for the minutes.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
And Chair Kane.
Aye. On a vote of 4-0, the approval of the minutes of December 3rd were approved with corrections. Under oral communications, I don't believe I have any. The next item on the agenda is an appeal. I'm going to do some introductory remarks. I want to do a little business related to that, but I'm tempted to actually table the meeting for just a couple minutes to see if our fifth commissioner will join us. So in preparation for that, I'm going to make some general announcement, and I'm going to just make sure we kind of take care of the process for these two different hearings. The next item is an administrative exception followed by an appeal. And the appeals are held as a de novo hearing. Testimony given at the zoning administrator's hearing should be repeated because the commission does not review the tapes of those meetings. Decisions rendered today will be based on the evidence presented at this hearing and the evidence in the file, including appeal documents, staff reports, and letters received. Individuals speaking today should therefore present all the evidence which they may wish this commission to consider. A handout describing the appeals process is available at the front counter, or at least it used to be. We'll see if it's still there. Appeal items are considered as public hearings. The commission will consider testimony from the appellant, applicant, staff, and any member of the public wishing to speak. If you wish to speak, please fill out a card and present it to the recording secretary. Now, that said, we have two hearings on the same property address. One is an administrative exception. The other is a variance request. Those are two separate hearings. If you want to speak on both, most of you have already heard this. If you want to speak on both, fill out a card for both items. If you only want to speak on the one, you're fine with however you labeled it. So if anybody wants to speak on two and you haven't filled out the two cards, please do so. Okay. With that in mind, I'm going to recess for about 4 minutes, and at 15 minutes after, we're going to come back to order with the hope that Mr. Lee will have joined us by then. So without objection from my fellow commissioners, we'll be adjourned for about 4 minutes. There we go. It looks like we're back on. So we're back in session as well. It's a continuation of the December 17th Planning Commission meeting. We're moving on to agenda item 6A. It's an appeal. We have two separate actions, so there's two separate hearings. The first one is for an administrative exception. It's PAE 2008-016. The location is 1449 Miradero Avenue. It's an appeal of a denied administrative exception to allow the reconstruction of a substandard sized garage, 17 feet by 15 feet 6 inches, so it will be code compliant two-car garage except for its turn radius. Staff is represented by Mr. Baxter. If you could give us an overview of the project, please. Or no, I'm sorry, Tim, you're in.
Right, I'll fill in for Mr. Baxter, do my best. As you noted, this application is for an administrative exception to build a new two-car garage without providing the code-required turn radius of 25 feet. There is no house floor addition that is proposed as part of this application. The turn radius that is proposed is approximately 22 feet instead of 25 feet. There are two permits on tonight's agenda concerning this property. The second one is a variance for floor area ratio. The Commission should consider these separately, and you can approve one and not approve the other, or vice versa, or approve or deny both. So, this is the first time that the Commission has considered the appeal of an administrative exception, so I'd like to just speak very briefly about what that is. It functions as kind of a minor variance. It's a way to seek relief from some regulation in the zoning code, but you don't have to meet the tough variance findings of there being something unique about the property. It is done, administrative exceptions are processed administratively. There's no public hearing, there's no notice to neighbors, because they are only for very minor exceptions to the code and very specific exceptions to the code. And the code points out, I think we have 13 or 14 different very specific regulations that you can ask for relief from through an administrative exception. The one that is being applied for in this case has to do with alterations to an existing parking facility. And parking facility here means any place you park a car. It doesn't mean that it has to be an above-ground garage. A garage for a single-family home or a commercial garage or subterranean. A simple garage for a single-family home qualifies. So an alteration that will increase the number of parking spaces where that facility is non-conforming with regard to the number of parking spaces serving an on-site use, which is the case here. The single-family home now requires 2 parking spaces of certain dimensions. The house currently does not have that. So the new garage would increase the number of parking spaces where it is now non-conforming. And where that alteration to the existing parking facility will create, continue, or exacerbate some nonconformity regarding parking design standards, hence the smaller turn radius. When the benefits of the increased number of parking spaces outweighs the impacts of the nonconformity regarding parking design standards. So that is the finding for this specific code regulation to be waived under an administrative exception. In addition, if the Commission were to consider granting the administrative exception, there are 3 general findings of fact that had to be made for all administrative exceptions. That the granting of the exception will result in design improvements, or there are space restrictions on the site which preclude full compliance with code requirements without hardship. Now that's similar to a variance finding, but it's much simpler and it's not as strict. The second one is that the granting of the exception will not be materially detrimental to public welfare or injurious to the property or improvements in the neighborhood. That is similar to the variance finding as well. And that the granting of the exception will not be contrary to the objectives of the applicable regulations. So having said that about AEs in general, let me talk a little more specifically about this case. The subject property is a rectangular lot. It's a little bit unusual in that it has a depth of only 103 feet. This administrative exception was applied for in October of this year, and on November 12th, the zoning administrator issued a decision letter denying the administrative exception, and the reasoning there was a belief that the larger garage would be, for all practical purposes, still a one-car garage due to the insufficient turn radius into and out of one of the new parking spaces. And at this point, I will try to describe. I think it's instructive to look at a photo of the existing driveway here. I believe that was included in the packet.
That's in our packet, yes.
Okay. So the garage will be reconstructed in place. They have secured permission from Glendale Water and Power to continue to encroach into easement. And there's a corner of the house back here which precludes the full turn radius from being met. This is why the zoning administrator was concerned that this more northerly parking space in the proposed new garage really would have difficulty being used. And noting that this application just trades one non-conforming condition for another, she was concerned that the proposal did not meet the objectives of the regulations, which was to provide increased parking spaces, and also that the public welfare might be harmed because the garage design did indeed discourage its use. That denial was appealed, and the appeal states that the staff, in the decision letter, incorrectly evaluated the garage, and determined that it would be inaccessible, and also made an error in describing the driveway as non-conforming. In addition, the applicants submitted some drawings that were done on a computer using the auto turn program, and which they believe demonstrates that the garage will indeed be usable. Further, there was some discussion about whether the driveway was non-conforming due to width or not. They contended that it was a full 9 feet 6 inches as required by code. I think the planner who worked in the case noted that their plans had a landscape planter here, which, on the drawings anyway, which doesn't exist in reality. I believe the root of this problem was that they needed a little bit of extra landscaping to come up with the minimum landscaping required for any lot under the code. But there are plenty of other hardscape areas around where they could replace this little bit and meet the code requirements for landscaping. So really the...
Would you suggest if we are going to make findings that we talk about that part of it?
It probably should be a condition that it should be replaced elsewhere in the property. The most important point here is for the commission to decide is whether this garage will really serve its function of providing 2 parking spaces. The 2 computer drawings here are using vehicles and turning radiuses which are used by Caltrans and by something called AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And their standard car area for maneuvering here is 19 feet long by 7 feet wide. And as shown in the drawings here, one drawing has one standard car of that size, but another smaller one. And the larger vehicle were in the southerly space, the smaller vehicle would be blocked. If the smaller vehicle is here, the larger vehicle would have to come in and make kind of a 3-point turn to get in. In addition, the Transportation Planning Division reviewed these plans, and they were concerned that this turn radius is drawn by the computer and submitted by the applicant, shows them as being right up against the property line here, where there is a hedge growing. And even so, comes pretty close to the corner of the house. And even if you forgive those things, that having to make a three-point turn might become so onerous that someone over time would just grow tired of it and end up parking on the street. So, and I think they were especially concerned, too, about backing out, that this sort of turn is much easier to do going in than coming out. So the second drawing that they submitted shows just two smaller cars. Neither one of them is the 19-foot by 7-foot standard that is used technically in the field to judge these turn radiuses. So based on this analysis, staff goes back to the administrative exception findings of, does the benefit of an increased parking space outweigh the negatives of the created nonconformity in parking design standards? And our concern is that if the parking space really is unusable, then you just have, what you've done is create a new building which still has only one parking space. And this is a larger building taking up more of the lot, and it's just likely to be put to other spaces such as storage or a workshop or perhaps a rec room or something. I don't know what these owners plan to do in that case, but we're not looking at just these owners' plans. You're looking at what some future owner how they might typically use this. And the real problem with that is that this building extends into the required side yard setback and the rear yard setback. And those setbacks are in the code to protect neighbors from any from visual encroachment towards their property as well as noise of activities. A garage by itself is the only building that is allowed to be in those setbacks. Workshops, rec rooms, all those things must observe a 5-foot setback. So if this is functionally going to be used as something other than a garage, then it shouldn't be in the setback. So I guess that's what is up to the commission to decide is, whether this 19-foot by 7-foot vehicle that is used in these turn radiuses, most vehicles aren't that large, some are, but you'd have to determine whether those impacts mean that it's not a good deal for the neighborhood in general.
I have a question.
Please.
I see that limitation here is really the corner of the house sticking out and do not have the enough radius, 25-foot radius
That's
to
right.
turn. And I could see that the way it is right now, the way it's proposed, the larger vehicle, I'm more concerned really making it in. Maybe they can make it in, but with the way it's designed right now, I don't think you have to do a kind of 3-turn to come out, and I don't think you have the space. You have to kind of go back the same way you came in, and it might be very difficult to do. Now, my question is that, providing if they could replace some of the landscape area they might lose, has anybody looked at maybe what is the possibility of increasing this opening and allowing more space of a point of entry to the garage? And you'll lose this landscape area, but by doing that, you might have actually a little bit more backup space and so on. So does that make any difference?
I would probably like to refer that comment.
That's not your area of expertise.
Who is the manager of that division who can probably answer more technical questions.
Okay.
I don't really see it myself off the bat, but I'll defer to him.
Okay, well, since we're kind of getting an overview, I think what I'd like to do is let's save that initial question for when we get through more of the process. And I share the thought as well. Any other initial questions for staff? Okay. We're going to continue with the public hearing. As the appellant, Mr. Lebecki, you'll have up to 15 minutes to present your case and anyone that's part of your case. Then at some point you should fill in a card, but you can.
I had to fill in a card as the
Appellant, it's fine. You can do that at the end or whenever you'd like, but let's do that. You have up to 15 minutes, and then we'll continue with interested parties, everyone that's turned into a card. We'll have some comments from staff or people, let's say from traffic, whoever happens to be here. At that point, you'll also have a few minutes to do a rebuttal to anything specific that you'd heard.
Okay.
And then at that point, I close the public hearing and we go into deliberation. So please begin.
My name's Laura Moore. I'm the co-owner of the property at 1449 El Miradero. We presented an application for an administrative exception to enlarge our garage. As was noted earlier, it's substandard in size, but it is even more restricted than Mr. Foy described. When I get home tonight, if I want to put my car in the garage, I have one of those sliding doors, kind of like those up there, and I have to slide it across, and there's a post in the middle, and when that door is open, it's only 7 feet 2 inches wide. So it's hard to get the car in there as it is. So while we do have a one-car garage, it's tough to get it in there now. One of the things in the finding, it says, is it an improvement? I do certainly think this would be an improvement. As Mr. Foy discussed, there is a utility easement in the rear. There is a power pole, and right now the garage is about 3 feet from the power pole, and the Water and Power won't let us get any closer. They would allow us to stay at that location, so we can't put the garage any further back. In the front, as he pointed out, the corner of the existing house, we have a 2-bedroom house, and that's the second bedroom, and it's the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. The 25-foot radius, if we go to the code, it talks, actually, if you go to the turning template, when you go to AASHTO, it's really talking about U-turns or 90-degree turns, and it's the outer turn radius of that. In the case that we have here, the car is not making a 90-degree turn where this outside needs to be 25 feet. It's more of an S-curve. And so that's what you see in the templates that are shown up on the wall. By the way, the bigger ones are the same as the smaller ones. I just brought a bigger version, so I thought it'd be easier to read. The engineer that I engaged to do this study for me used the AASHTO designed vehicle that was mentioned. It's not really a car because a passenger car is not 19 feet long and 7 feet wide. For reference, I'd like to refer to the Cadillac Escalade, which when I drive down the street and see one next to me, I think that is huge. Well, the Cadillac Escalade is 16 feet 11 inches long, which is clearly 2 feet shorter than the designed vehicle. So already that designed vehicle is oversized for a passenger car. It incorporates a certain factor of safety, if you will, a certain buffer between its zone and actual fixed obstacles. So as Mr. Foy said, we ran the design vehicle through our driveway and parked it in the car. And you can see out there that with the design vehicle, we can barely even get it in the garage because the clear space by code only has to be 20 feet. And to bring it in, and if it were really 19 feet long, we couldn't get it into the garage unless you backed it up and pulled it forward. But 19 feet is really long. So we said that's what you do if you're designing the street. That's what the traffic department uses when they're working on Brand Boulevard, but typically that's not what's used in a residential area. So what we did was put in the dimensions of the 2 cars that we have right now, which is I drive a station wagon, my husband drives a mid-sized car. The station wagon is 16 feet long and his car is 15. That's pretty typical of a passenger car. And so when we use those vehicles, when we use a passenger car, then it fits in, you can get it in. In reference to Mr. Lee's question, it does help a little bit. If we have a wider door, it just gives a little better clearance. We're showing a 16-foot door, which is a minimum and kind of a standard size, but if we had a bigger door, it would just make things a little easier to get in and out of. But we even talked about that ourselves, but we didn't know if that's a little far off from where we are now to make that decision. We've been told several times, as you know, we have 2 things presented before you today. One is regarding an expansion to the house, and we've been told that any expansion to the house requires an improvement to our garage. We've also been told that there are variances granted for providing a single parking spot instead of 2 parking spots. Well, that would just be another variance. I mean, it's one or another in this situation that we're looking at. The other thing I wanted to say is that in our plans for improving the house, we show the corner of the house being removed to provide the 25-foot. But this we'd like to be considered independently because the house project takes a long time. We have approvals, we have design review board, we have, permitting and construction. It's at least a year away, and we'd like to move forward with a part of the project that we think can go forward now, and that's why we presented this separately. We didn't have to do it, but we wanted to. We want to move forward with the garage now. Finally, I'd like to go back to the code and the findings, and as Tim said, Mr. Foy said, there are findings that you have to fill out. And so I wrote what I thought should be the findings to, if I can I hand these out?
Is this the same thing that you had done in this, or is it a different document?
It's a little more specific than that.
That's fine. I was going to let you know we had this. If that's
Yeah,
what you
I tried to make it as short and sweet as possible. So if it's all right with you, I'll go through the findings. The garage is substandard and not, today's garage is substandard and not usable for a second car, so the proposal would improve the situation. It would provide 2 spots usable by most cars, maybe not all cars, and yeah, maybe it's a little harder to get into, but 2 cars is better than 1. And granting the exception would not be detrimental to the public welfare. The intent of the code is to provide these 2 off-street covered parking, and that's what we're aiming to achieve. And the exception is not contrary to the objectives, because, as I said, we're attempting to provide 2 off-street spaces in the best way that we can, barring cutting off a corner of our house at this time. I think, let's see. I did have one other comment regarding the setbacks. The setback allows a garage within the side and the backyard setbacks. That's permissible under code. We're applying to build a garage. We park our cars in the garage when we can, and that's our intention, is to have a garage for 2 cars. Thank you. That's fine.
That's all your remarks for now?
That's all my remarks.
Questions for the appellant? All right, none at this second, I guess. Thank you very much. All right, we have some speaker cards. The first card we'll use is Rosa Flores and Mandy Medrano. Was I close on pronunciations?
I think so.
1 in a row.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us speak. And before I start, I'm Rosa Flores. This is my husband, Manny Medrano, and we have lived at 1540 El Miradero Avenue for almost 20 years. And before we start, we have a bit of a Santa Claus issue. Our son is the xylophone player in his Christmas pageant, so we need to leave before too long. If you will permit us, we'd like to sort of combine our comments with respect to the exception as well as the variance.
Well, you have 2 names, you've got 2 cards, and I understand what you're saying about leaving.
Mm-hmm. If we can, my husband's going to stay as long as he can so that he can catch at least most of the performance.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much. With all due respect to the applicants, there's nothing unique or exceptional about their property. In fact, it is fairly typical of our entire neighborhood. In that light, this isn't an application for an exception or for a variance. This is a unilateral attempt to change the ordinance as well as the laws that have protected our neighborhood for many, many years. Please don't allow that to happen, especially not during these tough times when we're all seeing homes that are flipping, that are changing hands all too often. And we've seen the folks who come to look at the homes. I know I have personally. On the one hand, you have people who come and they're looking at a home for themselves, for their families. On the other hand, you have folks who come with the cell phone and the measuring tape. And they don't see what all of us see when they look down our street. They don't see all the folks who have been living there and working there and passing away over the decades. What they see is unused FAR. What they see is any opportunity to maximize their return on investment. Please don't let that happen. When Manny and I bought our home almost 2 decades ago, I can't believe it's been that long, we did so after looking at more than 50 houses in Glendale. We focused on El Miradero Avenue because of its historic charm and its beauty. The street was even profiled in the real estate section of the LA Times some years ago. That's why we went to that street. And we felt that the rules, including the FAR ordinances and all rules that protect and preserve our neighborhood, would continue to be enforced to prevent the overbuilding and other problems that have plagued far too many other neighborhoods in Glendale. Please don't allow that to change. And as far as any support that the applicants might have received from other neighbors, let me ask you this question. If I were to decide tonight that, I should be allowed to exceed the speed limit on our street, and I circulated a petition to my neighbors, and some of them were good-hearted, and they signed off on it, and then I presented that petition to the Glendale Police Department, what do you think they might say? Or what if we decided that, we should pay income taxes at a lower rate than any of you? And again, I presented that petition to my good-hearted neighbors, and some of them actually signed off on that, and I presented that to the IRS. Can we imagine what their response might be? The point is this. In fact, the applicants have presented no evidence to show that they qualify for either a variance or an exception. We asked that this body continue to uphold the laws as they stand in order to protect and preserve our neighborhood, which has stood intact for almost 100 years. We ask that you please deny both the variance as well as the exception. Thank you very much.
My name is Manny Madrano. I'm Rosa's husband. First of all, I apologize for my appearance. I'm a journalist, and I've been in Yorba Linda covering mudslides all day, so it's been a big mess.
I have to ask, you're not going to be throwing any shoes.
Well, it's a tennis shoe.
I
Won't
couldn't
hurt us.
resist.
But I just wanted to make two very brief points.
Couldn't wait.
Number one, if this commission allows this exception, this variance, in my view, what will happen, because I've seen this countless times, because I cover hearings like this all the time as a reporter, is if you grant it here, similarly situated applicants will come before you, and if they're denied, gee, what a surprise, there's litigation, and suddenly our Glendale tax dollars, instead of being devoted to fixing potholes or taking care of our beautiful parks, are wasted on frivolous litigation. But frankly, here's the main argument that I'd like to make with you. It's been my privilege. I'm all over Southern California covering hearings like this. And there's always a common thread when people come before a commission like yourself, and that is all they want is that everyone play by the rules. Down in Orange County the other day, and this fella puts in AstroTurf, and the rules say you can't do that. So the city looks at him and says, take it off, you got to play by the rules. I covered another hearing in another city where there's a mandate that everyone who has brush behind their area in a fire zone has to take out the brush. One homeowner says, no, I'm not going to. Well, that endangers all the homes. So the city says, you got to play by the rules. Well, I would respectfully submit to this commission that these applicants also have to play by the rules. Everyone in this room, including the applicants, if they're honest with themselves, were drawn to this wonderful, rustic, charmed area because there were rules and regulations that precluded overbuilding and mansionization. And all we would respectfully request is that we allow to live in this area, because we're going to stay in that house till we're dying. We're going to give it to these kids if they want it. But just let it maintain and preserve the beautiful rustic charm, which was the very reason that drew us there, almost 20 years ago. And thank you for letting us speak in advance so we can make the Christmas pageant. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Questions for the speakers? Seeing none, all right. Thank you both very
Thank
much.
you. Have a lovely holiday.
Thank you. All right, the next card I have is from Jonathan. The last name begins with a B, but the rest of it is a little soft in the pencil. So if you could help us with your name.
Ferris.
Ferris, thank you.
I really don't have any
And just now that you're at the mic, if you could do the full name.
Okay, my name is Jonathan Barris. I live at 1447 El Miradero Avenue, and I don't really have any comments on the administrative exception.
Okay, so you actually wanted it for the other one?
Yeah, I have another card, though. So
You do?
don't have to-
Then you're good. Okay.
Okay.
You're the immediate next-door neighbor.
Yes, I am.
So you're staring at their current garage right now as it is?
If I'm in my backyard, I stare
Well,
at it, yes.
yes, all right. So, but at this point, you're focusing more on the FAR that'll be heard later.
Yes,
All right, thank you, sir.
thank you.
Leslie Lundgren?
I'm Leslie Lundgren, and I live at 1451 Winchester. And I'm here speaking against the exception. I know that it really doesn't make I'm also here on the variance. But most people, grew up in Glendale, and as Manny Madrota said, I am living in what was my parents' home. So I grew up in the area. So I know exactly what changes have been made on that street and on Winchester. A lot of the homes that were built on El Merodero that are larger than the variance were there when I was 10 years old. So they have not been, no building and exceptions have been made. And I believe that that turn is really hard to make, so that they should not allow the garage to be extended out, because most people won't bother about trying to get in and out, because everyone wants to zip in and out of their garage. And I have a turn with a turning radius in the back, and it's really hard to get in and out of the second car out of my garage. And you really can't with the turning that small of a radius. It's very hard. It's easy to get in, but to back out is really difficult, especially with the house being built out to where it is. And so that's the reason why I'm against it. Then I guess I'll speak on the other one later.
In just a few minutes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Questions for the speaker? None. Thank you very much. Okay, that's the last speaker card that I have. That will allow our appellant to do a rebuttal.
I just had one comment. I didn't address the backing out earlier. The cars, my engineer tells me cars are, and my husband, who's the car fanatic in the family, it's more maneuverable to back out. I'm not going to tell anyone it's going to be easy, but the car, if it can pull in that fashion, can also back out. That's all I wanted to say.
All right. Now, I know we have some representatives from staff. Somebody from transportation was here, right? And since I have questions, I'm assuming my fellow commissioners might as well.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. John Obagdinian, Traffic Transportation Administrator. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Let's start with my commissioners. Questions for staff?
Nothing right now.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the AASHTO Caltrans standards. They've been talking about an F-150 pickup truck, 17 feet. Or
actually, it's 19 feet.
Yeah, 19 feet. An extremely large vehicle. Now, is that applied to, like, residential garages, or does Caltrans use that more in highway studies?
In general, that's more applied in the design of streets, highways, turning radiuses at intersections, freeway on and off ramps. That's what basically what governs in most cases is the truck turning radiuses. Those are much larger vehicles. But for passenger vehicles in residential streets, for turning radiuses, that's when it's applied. In designing parking lots and parking structures, you essentially are trying to design it for the worst case scenario, including a pickup truck. These days pickup trucks also get modified, and you're trying to design it so that essentially it will the design will meet most of the vehicle sizes, with exceptions when going into a parking structure. There's some limitations, so they restrict it to certain height or certain width in cases.
And they didn't know about Hummers.
Yes, the Hummers, for example, are a good example. Many of our existing driveways or garages that are in residential streets, except for new homes, essentially they have this problem. Even if it's considered a two-car garage, you have that problem if you have two large cars trying to get in, or you have a large and a small. People come up with a way of always a small car gets in and the large one gets in second, or vice versa. So in most cases, the entering, in my opinion, it's easier to enter, and then the backing up, depending on how good of a driver you are, how you back up out of a driveway in a narrow situation. You don't run into a wall, you don't run into landscape areas. Those are the type of problems we see every day in residential streets that are built at a later dates. So whether we use the AASHTO standard in this case or not, we looked at that driveway. We accepted the maneuvering or the design that has been submitted by the applicant in terms of, but as you see, if you apply to AASHTO-sized vehicles, it will be very, very tight. Even if you apply to both of the smaller sized vehicles, I think it's still tight. Our concern is the backing out. Most of the time, residents, you live there for day in, day out, you get used to, how to turn your wheels and how to enter and how to exit. But in general, there are certain standards we have to use, and as applicants submitted the AASHTO-sized vehicle, we evaluated that garage based on the AASHTO standard. What they didn't submit is if you have two vehicles at the same size, AASHTO standard size, then you'll definitely have a very, very tight area for the...
But I'm also hearing you say that in many ways you think AASHTO might be kind of strict?
It is strict in terms of the size. Yeah, the size of the vehicle. That size vehicle is used, as I said, for intersection designs. We do use that also in parking lots, but when you drive into a parking lot, sometimes the aisle widths are narrower in some parking lots, even within the city, than others. So if you have a large vehicle, an SUV, a Hummer, or a F-150 pickup truck that's been modified, it's tough to get in and out. So it all depends. Existing conditions, there are two-car garages I know that people are really squeezing their vehicle. When you're modifying a garage, obviously you try to bring it up to the standards. Even with the new standards, I think it will still be fairly tight to get in. It's not impossible, but it's very tight to get in. And probably tighter to get out, backing out, because there's no backing out area. If there was a backing out area, I think there's a way to do that.
Maybe in long term.
Yeah, in the long term. There's another area that we looked at in the design is where even that AASHTO vehicle is designed, it goes into somewhere of almost a 20-30 degree angle. When you go in, you're going to have to go into an angle and then come back out, try to do a three-point turn to correct it. So we're not against adding more off-street parking. In general, dealing with parking situation in residential street, we're all for adding additional off-street parking. So if this could be made to work, we're all in favor of it, because that removes one or two cars off the street. That was always our goal.
By the way, you see that is just by removing the corner of the house.
I think that if the house was modified, that's the corner. If you look at their design, again, assuming you would go with a smaller scale size vehicle, obviously cutting that corner will help, because you're coming in, and then on the way back, you're coming out of the driveway, and then when you're straight and you can back out of the driveway straight, then you should be okay. So that modification definitely could be an improvement.
Do you know, or do you see any other modification that could apply?
I really can't see. Again, I'm not an architect in terms of what others designs, but it's a pretty straightforward boxy-shaped home and straight lines. So it's, unless you cut that corner, which is the problem, coming in and trying to go right to get into that, to align to get in, that's very tight.
How familiar are you with the size of, let's say, passenger cars, like an Accord?
The Accords, I try to get my chart, but I don't have it with me. And Honda Accord will probably be about 12.
12 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. It's even smaller than that.
You have to depend, you have to go from the...
I'm
sorry, it probably is about 10, because in a parking space, approximately 10 and a half.
And something like a Grand Cherokee? I'm not going to do a lot of these for you.
They're about the same. They're about the same. The Accords are a little bit more sportier these days, but the older Accords are smaller.
How about a 1982 four-barrel?
I have to get my blue book.
Buick Riviera that wouldn't fit in there for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
It all depends. Again, we're looking at these more of not only today, but if you sell the house and somebody else is buying it, sometimes they don't look at the side of the garage, so that becomes an issue. in terms of what would be the right standard to follow in terms of a garage design. But on the other hand, there is a factor of if you can remove 2 cars from the street, depending on what the parking occupancy is on that street, it obviously helps all the neighbors together.
Any other questions for, all right, thank you very much. Closing remarks from staff, and I know I at least have some other questions for staff as well, but anything?
No, I don't have anything to
with
add.
Mr. Foy?
No, I don't have anything to add, thank you.
All right, fellow commissioners, any questions for staff?
Nope.
Okay, I've got a, probably, well, maybe just one. The conversation about how many square feet they can add to still be under the .30 FAR, which is going to be talked about more in the next hearing, but it was alluded to by the appellant in one of their statements that if they did any addition, even a square foot, they would have to reconstruct the substandard garage. I'm not sure that was an accurate statement. Would staff clarify that, please?
It's kind of true, however...
Well, there we go.
Yes, unless they get an administrative exception, again, to allow up to 100 square feet without providing required parking. So again, we have, I told you that the administrative exceptions has a list of 14 very specific code provisions that you can ask for a waiver from without the tough variance findings, and adding up to 100 square feet to a house without...
Done with an administrative exception without a variance.
Without providing the code-required parking, so...
So theoretically, they could leave the garage alone, add 100 square feet to the house, sell it to the zoning administrator, and they're home free.
Yes.
With an administrative exception.
But I do want to emphasize, it is another discretionary permit, which they may or may not get.
I think she brought that one up.
Okay. I don't have any other questions for staff. I do have a couple questions now for the appellant. You could come up. When I visited the property, I noticed there were 2 cars in your driveway.
Right.
Is there actually room in your garage, or is it full of the stuff that might be in my garage?
No, my husband parks, and on Friday he'll be in there.
I just was curious. 'Cause
Well, it's the other side where we cannot get to by a car. It's full of stuff, but we actually...
You actually use the
if I can
garage as
say,
a garage.
You know, I'm trying to go by the facts, but if I can just say something, I think we're one of the few people who, on the street, who even now park a car in the garage. But I would also say that my husband parks there, not me, because I've scraped my car getting into the garage.
Mm-hmm.
We both did. Yeah.
Okay. The proposed garage, will the garage door be, and if you know what I mean when I say an eave versus a gable?
No.
Will it be on the side that an eaves trough would hang on, the overhead door, or would it be the triangle shape? That's really technical, I know.
No, you just need to use other words. The garage right now,
want to translate for
the
me?
garage is peaked towards the
And
driveway.
is that the end that the door
Yes.
would go in?
And the door would go in the peaked, yes. It would stay the same. It's peaked in the front now, and it's peaked in the proposed plan, it's peaked the same way.
Okay, and the temporary structure, and this may be going back to staff, the temporary structure you have right now in your driveway?
Oh, the awning?
Yes.
It fell on the car, actually. It got
Today?
too much rain last week.
Oh, okay.
Because we're trying to keep the car covered, and the rain...
So that was like a temporary
Right.
carport for you?
Yeah, because we were trying to keep both cars out of the sun.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
Not
worked.
there anymore.
Yeah.
It's in the trash.
I think it was out there the other, well, I guess it was the other day that I went by. All right. And there's nothing that precludes them from using that temporary structure, correct? They don't need to permit that, or do they?
Yeah, I believe they are precluded, yes. There's nothing in the code that allows for temporary structures and setbacks, and I think also the building department places a limit on how long something can be up before.
Because the things collapse in rainstorms and things like that?
Probably for exactly these reasons, yes.
All right. I wanted to make sure on that. All right. Those are all the questions I have. Does the commission have questions for anyone else involved with the process? All right. Thank you very much. We're going to close the public hearing. We'll enter into deliberations. Who would like to go first? It seems like last time I went to the left first, so I think I have to go to the right. I really like to be fair about that.
I know. I'd like to listen to some other comments right now.
Okay.
Okay, then
Very
it's my
nice.
turn. Seems to me that we're trading a currently non-conforming garage for a non-conforming turn radius. And having a better garage is going to be more probability of people parking off the street and actually using the garage than the current situation, in my opinion. So I don't subscribe to saying no because of all the what-ifs, because you can play that game forever, and there's all sorts of what-ifs that you could imagine. We're dealing with here and now, the administrative exception I would be inclined to grant.
All right. Mr. Lee or Mr. Berman?
I'll go. I heard from the Transportation Department about the AASHTO codes and, what they've and the staff made their decisions on. And the reason that it's there is for the guidance. Right now, I believe that our applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Levicki, I think, is sincere in their proposal as to what they want to achieve in using the garage. But we also need to look at the standards as to what the cars that you never know that you might drive a Honda today, but you may drive a Ford 150 the next day. So I think that's why the standards are there. And the comment that the applicant has made in that they both scraped the side of their car using the garage, it was the fact that that even existing garage or even large garage with even limited or non-conforming turn, I think they will face that problem more, with the new garage. So my thought is really that although that I do have sympathy towards the opponents and their sincerity with the usage of garage, I tend to be on the side of the guidelines that's been set by the government and the city.
All right. Mr. Berman, your comments?
No.
Nothing to say? All right. Would you like me to jump in first, or do you want to go, Mr. Sheets?
I'll go ahead and go. It's another one of those that's not simple, and I appreciate all the hard work that the appellant has done on both these issues. I'm either lucky enough or not lucky enough to have lived in the city for a lot of years, and I've seen some of the issues that have come up, and I've seen a lot of the changes that have occurred. I can appreciate, I drove by the house, I didn't get out and measure anything, but based on the pictures and the measurements and looking at it, it is a tough issue. I noticed most houses in that, both sides of that street have a similar problem. Some have been corrected by putting a two-car garage, and I have questions about what that has caused as far as using the garage. First, I think that the standards are based on not so much the extreme, but the worst-case scenario. I think that's why they use the largest car, truck, whatever type vehicle. I think it's a safety factor, and I think it's will motivate people to use their garage. I have concerns about the size of the driveway. Based on where the house is and where the hedge or wall, I thought it was a wall, but I know there was some type of structure there on the side of the driveway. I personally think backing out would be harder, and I think the purpose of this standard is not so much what the appellant might do and the size of their cars, but what might happen in the future, which is why the standard's based on the extreme. I've known of at least 2 incidents, one personal within my family and then actually others, where they ended up having this exact same situation and they ended up not using that part of the garage. And my fear there is once you don't use that part of the garage, that's it. It's not going to be used. It could become anything. It could be added on to. It could become some other type of use, nullifying the place for the second car. And then also I see the side of all the people, and some of which I know that put a lot of hard work into coming up with standards and codes for the right reasons. If I look at that neighborhood and what it looks like and what it stands for and what it represents as far as our city, I personally want to keep it the way it is. And I know that's what the appellant's trying to do, but they also, I think what happens is they become a victim of these new standards developed by many frustrated residents that have fought hard to stop past abuses and try to put the right things in place to make sure we don't make major changes to our neighborhood. So I'm leaning towards the standard, following the standard, and sustaining what's already been decided.
All right, thank you.
I have one question.
Certainly.
I don't understand something here. This seems to go inside of this garage to get out. I don't know how you really get out of there.
That's the design with the full-size 19-foot long car.
Oh, I see.
Nobody's got. Unless it's a Ford F-150.
Which means you'd have to
I haven't had enough time getting out of my condo on standard.
Unless we convert the building to a construction company, put an office in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I have some comments.
Actually, allow me first for my introduction. So let me build on what you were saying, Mr. Sheets, because the same thought occurred to me. Is in practical terms, what happens if things change? Perhaps we were even misinformed over the intentions of the appellant. I believe they're honorable, but let's say things change, and instead of being able to put 2 cars into that garage, they only put 1 in. It's basically the same situation they have right now. They have a single, a garage that can be used for a single car. But however, the garage they have is only 17 feet deep, which would not be able to put in that F-150 pickup that we're concerned that they might be buying. So for me, the idea was, okay, they have a substandard garage that is going to be substandard again, but only in terms of the turning radius. There's a practical issue there. But at least now they've got a garage that's deep enough to be able to pull 1 car in for sure and a fighting chance to pull in the second. I looked at again, it's more of a variance phrase than an administrative exception, but I looked at the practical difficulty of lopping off a piece of the house simply to get the 25-foot radius, and I thought that was a little extreme, that wasn't kind of fair to ask for. I know that staff and traffic took an effort to apply AASHTO/Caltrans standards, but I think that implying those to a residential, slow-moving, drive into the garage type of situation, I think was probably a little overly strict for what they have. So given that, given the things I've said, I'm actually in favor, and by the way, this is a whole separate conversation from what we're going to be talking about in the next hearing. This has nothing to do with additions. This has simply to do with the garage and trying to make it work well for the neighborhood, for the appellant. The next-door neighbor is not professing any difficulties with it. I think I could add a few conditions that would make sure that it would not suddenly become an eyesore in the neighborhood. And so with those things in mind, I would be, and I'll share those in a moment, I would be inclined to grant the administrative exception. And the kind of things that we're talking about, well, obviously would be to get rid of that driveway planter that was shown on the plans, so that they have their full-width driveway, that the height of the garage wouldn't be no greater than 8 feet bottom of ceiling joist. That would still allow them to get a 7-foot garage door in and room for a garage opener. One of the reasons I was asking about what side the door was on is if it's on the eave side, it becomes a supporting element, and the laminated beam or the steel support would be so great they'd have trouble keeping it at 8 feet. But knowing that it's on the gable end, they still should be able to survive that. That would be a 3/12 pitch or less on the roof, which would also work to minimize the height of the garage. I mean, all those kind of things would be to make sure that it doesn't suddenly, pop up and become larger than what would be appropriate in the neighborhood. I'm just seeing if there was something I glossed over in terms of what I was talking about. The only other thing I would say is the appellant understands the limitations. They understand what they'll do with their cars. Staff threw out the concept of, well, Lord knows what will go on with gas prices. I think the days of us all driving around in F-150 pickups and Cadillac Eldorados with huge tail fins is probably past. We're enjoying low gas prices today, but sooner or later it's going to switch around, and we're going to be driving probably something closer to the size of an old Gremlin or Pacer than what we currently have. So with all those things in mind, again, I lean toward favoring the administrative exception. Now, I know, Mr. Torgerson, you had some thoughts that you wanted to add on.
Yes, the 19-foot ASHTO limits and everything, as the gentleman from the traffic department pointed out, are designed for worst-case conditions to make parking lots safe, where we've all seen kids racing around in their oversized trucks and everything. In my neighborhood, there's a perfectly conforming 2-car garage with a perfectly conforming driveway with a perfectly conforming setback, and the guy owns a Hummer and something that looks like a tractor-trailer front end that's built into a pickup truck. I don't even know what you call it. It's
big.
It's huge. Both of them are huge.
A big honking pickup truck.
When he parks either of those in the driveway, they hang out in the street, and when he parks in the street, they're so wide only one car can get by that area. And so, to me, whatever public safety standards there are need to be applied to public areas. And if granting an administrative exception causes a turn radius that's too small for a Hummer or a 19-foot F-150, then my opinion is that that's a private property issue. There's no public safety issue. If they want to buy a big monster car and scrape their house and their car every time they try to get in the driveway, they're welcome to. I lived in a triplex with 3 garages, 3 single-car garages, and the one that we were assigned 40 years ago, but the one we were assigned was on the inside. It's like getting into that northerly, where the map is. And people that have that unit, you just knew not to have the 1972 Riviera that was 20 feet long. I had a motorcycle, so that was easy. It's a matter of private property, and if you buy it and a practical car like a 12-foot long Honda Accord fits in there, or you buy a Mini Cooper, you're done. If you buy a stupid car that won't even fit in a conforming driveway, well, you're going to park on the street. So,
I have one question, Mr. Foy. If this exception was allowed, then they have right to build out 477 square foot without triggering that .30.
that's not, the garage isn't part of the floor area ratio.
Well,
You're talking about the unintended consequences.
Yeah,
Let me reopen it briefly for staff to respond to that.
Yes, as noted, the property must be brought up to compliance with parking standards before additions can be made, and without requiring a variance from the floor to area ratio, they could add something like 477 square feet. We have a couple different figures of building size floating around right now, but that's correct.
By allowing this variance.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Yes, without triggering a variance for floor to area ratio, you could build up to something like 477 square feet. There was some difference between the building permit, the size of the building listed on our building permits and what's in the county assessor's records. So I don't want to commit to exactly 477 square feet, but
It's somewhere
that's the ballpark.
397 to 477,
Yeah.
I think.
I just wanted to clarify by allowing this exception, that's what will happen, is allowing 400.
Well, they still have to meet all of their code.
Right, I
You
understand.
would still have to do setbacks and everything else. They'd still have to meet the landscaping requirements.
Right. Well, I'm pretty sure they'll allow.
But I'm really glad that you brought that up in terms of the unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, reclosing the hearing, continuing with deliberations.
Well, Mr. Berman, I think you have the deciding vote.
I'm waiting for Solomon to give us some advice.
Well, my advice is, I think we've all made our initial comments. The unintended consequences gives me a bit of pause, but by the same token, they still would have to operate along several guidelines. They still have, and if they try not to, they come back with variances. And staff and the commission has a memory as it relates to variances. So in terms of the possibility of expanding the lot, they'd still have to meet all their setbacks. They'd still have to meet their landscaping and all their other requirements. So I'm not terribly concerned in terms of them being able to go up to a .30 floor area ratio.
Let me ask you, when I looked at the property, I don't think there's a room for them to expand out, but they can go up and build on top of it without triggering any variances or any problems by adding 477 second story on the house.
They would still have to meet design review board,
Right.
admittedly.
Right.
But, I mean, you're right to have that.
Within the law, they can do that.
You're right to have that concern. That's a very fair thing to point out.
I'd like to see what it would look like when they made these changes to go by all the rules.
But that is
How
if
that would modify the...
I'm sorry?
that is if we allow this.
Yeah.
Well,
That's off of this one.
by the same token, if this administrative appeal was denied, then they could say, well, all right, I'm just going to build 450 square feet. This is design review board.
Sorry?
Yeah.
No, they'll tear off the corner of their house and be able to do it.
And then I'm just going to, when I build the 450
Yeah.
square feet, I'm just going to modify that one room and round off that
Right.
room a little
Yeah,
bit.
you could
Now
do
I got
that.
a conforming garage, conforming turn radius, no administrative section, and 450 extra square feet, and I'm a happy camper. So I don't see where that's an unintended consequence. It's just, that's just
Being
the way
aware
the
of
law,
it,
yeah,
yes,
that's
right.
the way the law is written, so.
Fair enough. Mr. Sheets?
Now, just another thought comes to mind for me. I see, just based on past history and what can happen, I see the possibility here of this situation being similar to what they call stacked parking. As far as people wanting to adjust to get, when they're going to get in the garage, who gets in there first, can it fit? I had trouble getting in and out last time.
You have to hire a valet?
Are you suggesting we make that a condition?
No, but my problem with this is I feel for the appellant. I mean, I could see me being in their situation. But for me, relative to this and other variances, what I struggle with is what we tend to do, what human nature does is we look at the appellant, and for lack of a better term, we feel bad or feel sorry for their situation, their predicament, and it makes very good sense what they're trying to do. But beyond that person, there are literally dozens, sometimes many more than that, people that have worked over an extensive period of time to try to find an amenable way to correct problems that have happened in the past. So my concern is not the impact, and this isn't any reflection on the appellant, is not to just ignore what you want to do, but it's more to look at what the intent is of these standards and zoning criteria. And it's so simple for one variance, one change to lead to another and lead to another, and that's my concern. So that's kind of where I'm stuck with this, and I just wanted to share that enhanced view.
They have stacked parking now.
They do have.
So, and again, it's all philosophical and tipping of scales.
You know, it's which came first, you know, which.
All right, well, I'm going to close discussion. I'm going to invite someone to make a motion, and we'll see which gets 3 votes and which gets 2.
We don't have a motion in our package, do we?
We have a motion, to reverse with some potential findings and some potential.
I guess I lost the.
And the appellant also submitted some findings, too.
That's true. Yeah, that's right there. So we have potential findings here and here. We also have the potential conditions.
Potential findings.
But you know what? Rather than make you go through that and then get 2 votes, let me see if someone here wants to vote. No, well, let's see if somebody wants to make a motion to uphold the zoning administrator's denial.
I so move.
And we have a motion seeking a second for that.
Second.
A motion support. Call the roll for sustaining the zoning administrator's finding, or denial, rather.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
No.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
And Chair Kane.
No. So on a vote of 3-2, the administration exception has been denied. Appeal process on that is what, the 10-day thing again? 15 days?
15 days.
Anybody, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it here in writing. I'm sorry? Anybody aggrieved? Aggrieved by the decision has 15 days to appeal to the planning department, and that appeal would then be heard by council? All right.
Yeah. Oh, it would be till Friday, January 2nd. I don't believe the commission doesn't have the power to do that.
You get extra days by the holiday.
The commission doesn't have
Holidays don't count, if that's what you're asking. Is it 15 days calendar days excluding holidays, or is it 15 work days?
I believe it's calendar days, but it doesn't include the holidays. You get extra day because of the holidays.
So it includes Sundays but not holidays?
Yeah, but I should actually, since we have the other hearing, we'll look at that.
We'll clarify that. We can't change the 15 days on the dais. But we'll clarify what that 15 days means. All right, we're moving on to agenda item 6B. This is a variance. It's PVAR 2007-047. It's, again, 1449 El Miradero Avenue. It's an appeal to reverse the zoning administrator's denial to allow an addition or remodel with an FAR of .35, where .30 is allowed in the R1 zone. The Planning Commission heard the case in 2008 and remanded the case to the zoning administrator because originally they were asking for .40 and they then went to .35, right? So it was a significant change, if I recall. All right, staff are represented by Mr. Foy. Overview, please.
Sure. Again, as you stated, this is the appeal of the zoning administrator's decision to deny a standards variance to allow an FAR of 0.35. The maximum allowed by code is 0.3. The proposal was to allow a 786 square foot addition to the first and second stories of the home, and to build a new detached garage. A new detached garage, which actually resolves the previous issue in that the corner of the house is cut off. So the garage in this proposal is fully compliant with code, including the turn radius. A little bit of legal background. In 1991, The city council set a floor area ratio for this neighborhood of .3, but had an exception that every property could have a home, a minimum of 2,200 square feet. That exception stood for 13 years until 2004, when council eliminated that exception, and there is simply a limit of .3 floor to area ratio. And for those who don't know, a floor to area ratio means the ratio of the floor area of the house to the lot area. As the chair indicated, the commission heard a previous variance on this for a home with a floor to area ratio of .4. At the hearing, there was a proposal to change that, to decrease that to .35. The commission remanded it to the zoning administrator, who held another hearing in October, I believe in October, which was, it may have been September. The decision letter denying that was in October. And this was again appealed to the commission. The zoning administrator's decision letter stated that there was no justifiable practical land use difficulty or any unnecessary hardship which could justify the variance. Noted that there were no exceptional or unique land use circumstances in this. And it indicated that while the proposed home would not be detrimental to the public welfare, that the granting of the variance could set a precedent for the neighborhood and would undermine the city council's intents in setting fair standards. This decision was appealed by the property owners, who said the decision was an error, and they submitted some new information showing that there were similar approvals granted for at least 2 residential projects elsewhere in the city. They believe that those approvals set a precedent. They also indicated in their appeal that there are 19 homes within 300 feet of their property that exceed 2,200 square feet, and that their lot is smaller than most other lots in the overall northwest Glendale area. Staff's recommendation is to sustain the zoning administrator's decision and deny the appeal. The reasoning that someone should be able to build under the laws that were present when they purchased the home is flawed, staff believes, because that would mean that not only are existing structures grandfathered in when zoning codes change, but if even the potential to build is also grandfathered in, then every zoning change becomes pointless. The examples of the larger homes that the appellant submitted, upon being researched, were found that almost all of them complied. It was 56 out of 57 complied with the codes that were in place at the time. As for the 2 variances that were approved that granted extra floor area ratio, they didn't have much in common with this property. In one of them, there was a variance required for the FAR simply because of a steep slope. In that case, if the property had not had such a steep slope, they wouldn't have needed an FAR variance. In other words, for that zone, with a lower slope, you had a more generous FAR already granted under the code. So that was, which is not the case here. There's simply one FAR limit, no matter the circumstances of your property. And in the second case cited, there was a floor area addition of 0.01 compared to the 0.05 requested here, and that case added only 95 square feet, which today could be approved under administrative exception, as we covered in the previous hearing. Staff's main concern with this variance application is that FAR limits are set in residential areas mostly to limit the visual mass of the site, the visual mass of a building, and a very important component of that is the visual mass in its setting on its site. That's why an FAR which ties the size of the building to the lot area is used instead of simply having an overall square footage for a home. Having an FAR limit in the code very directly implies that the city is concerned about the visual mass of the building in relation to the area of its site. It is true that this property, for such a small site, has an unusually wide frontage and a shallow depth. So that a little bit mitigates that, I will say. But the city council, in setting the FAR originally, and then later, only 4 years ago, taking out the exception that allowed homes to exceed the FAR, made a pretty strong statement, staff believes. And to the degree that we are trying to tie the size of a home to the size of its property, it's difficult to argue, well, I have a small property, I should have a larger home than what the code allows. It's difficult to see how that really is fulfilling the intent of the ordinance. And based on that, staff recommends that the zoning administrator's decision should be sustained.
All right, questions for staff at this moment? All right, seeing none, we'll continue, or actually I should open and we'll continue the public hearing. Ms. Moore?
Again, my name's Laura Moore, co-owner of the house in El Miradero. I'm kind of glad Mr. Medrano spoke up first, because one of the things he said is people should play by the rules. And we are playing by the rules. The city has a variance process. Zoning, as you can see up there, the R1 zone is a large zone. Zoning can't be specific to an individual property. It's for a larger area. And the city of Glendale allows variances. Some cities don't, but Glendale does. So what I ask is that this be considered as an individual application, because individually the city grants variances, and individually there are circumstances that apply to this property and this area that don't apply other places. We've lived in the neighborhood 15 years, and our current house, you probably know by now, is 2-bedroom, about 1,400 square feet. We're here again because we're not experts in the field. We're family, and we're trying to make a reasonable addition to our house. Just last week, I reread portions of the code and found things new that are relevant to this case. And I've looked through the city archives to find precedent cases where variances have been granted, and they have been granted within the last 2 years. They've been granted since the code change. You've got a lot of stack of papers to review, so I was surprised how much paperwork there is. I'd like to refer to the case studies, which was on my package about page 52. I submitted this last week and asked it be included in your packet because there's a lot of discussion about our neighborhood and El Miradero. On the street, as Mr. Foy mentioned, the lots are 103 feet deep. Typically in northwest Glendale, they're 150 feet. You can see on the zoning map I put up there that our block between Winchester and El Miradero is half the size of everybody else's. Our block is unique. People have said that already. It's unique for a couple of reasons, because it's a historic old area, and it's also got these shorter lots.
Just a moment. Show the page that you'd like us to be on.
Case studies, I know, 52.
We got
It's way down there. If you see the one, it's...
We've got this.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's that, and the 2 pages in
And
front
then
of
the
that.
one and in front of it.
Yeah, in front of that,
All right.
yes. That's the case.
I mean, we're rustling back and forth.
Right, thank you.
At least at this point,
But
it'd
I
be nice
couldn't
to
even
be...
find it.
I'd
Well,
like
if
to be
you
on
stay
the
on
same
that
page.
table, why don't you just stay on that table, and I'll read the rest to you. That table lists every house on El Miradero, every lot size, and every property size. And the highlighting shows you that there are 18 properties that exceed the currently allowed floor area ratio of 0.2. Why does this matter? Everyone says, hey, they're pre-existing. Why do we care? Because if I go back to the code, which says R1, traditional The zone is designed to codify historic development standards in the older, flatter residentials. These standards have been developed to avoid rendering existing dwellings nonconforming. In fact, that is what happened on our street. 40% of the houses are nonconforming. That tells me something's different about El Miradero, and the thing that is different is the lots are shorter. I don't have time to go through all 52 pages because I only have 15 minutes. I want to go through a few of the houses here to show you that the development is reasonable. The people who have houses, following beyond that page, houses that exceed the code, for the most part, they don't look out of place. The first one is 1555 El Miradero, which is 2,200 square feet, next to a house with 1,700 square feet. A similar one below that. And then on the following page, Mr. Medrano, who spoke, he lives at 1540 El Miradero. His house is 2,690 square feet. His lot is the same size as mine. The code allows reasonable development. Is his not reasonable? When I drive down the street, I see reasonable houses, and that's what the code allows, and that's what variance is allowed. I'm not asking for 2,600 square feet. I'm asking for a little bit more to make a little bigger house. There are some where it's not reasonable. If you go to the following page, 1537, there's one that's 2,700 square feet. Frankly, it looks awful. If you've ever driven up the street, it's a 2-story gray box. It looks terrible. We don't want to do that. We'd like to present something that's reasonable and compatible with the neighborhood. Next, I'd like to talk about the properties mentioned by Mr. Foy at Dora Verdugo and Jackson. North Jackson, a variance was approved to exceed the FAR by 0.3. Apparently, they were allowed to exceed because it's a hillside zone and there are other circumstances. But in fact, they were allowed to exceed the code. A variance was granted. Another one on Dora Verdugo, they were allowed to exceed the code by 235 square feet. And in approving those variances, the zoning administrator says this, I quote, from October 4th, 2006, the code intends to promote reasonable development or use of property, and to deny the request would unduly restrict the flexibility for such use. Frankly, when I saw Dora Verdugo and I saw the Jackson letter approving that, I was amazed. I said to myself, we just need to change the name. The circumstances that apply to to Jackson in particular are exactly the same things. There's no other development that could be done to the property without triggering the variance process, because the existing house size and non-conforming floor area already exceed the FAR. They're already over the FAR, they get to exceed it more. I just don't understand that. But it was granted. It was granted by the City of Glendale. The variance request will accommodate the changing needs of the owner and will allow a use that will be compatible with the property and the surrounding area. Those are the same things I'm talking about. Further, there are such houses on the immediate area that exceed the allowable floor area and have the same or close to the same lot area as the subject property. The subject addition blends in. The scale and massing as viewed from the street do not deviate. All the things that are in the approval of North Jackson apply to our house. I'm not sure why our application was viewed differently. Okay. We're asking for a floor area ratio increase of 0.05, which is 309 square feet. This is less than what was granted on Jackson, where 690 square feet was permitted, less than what was granted on Dora Verdugo, where 235 was permitted, less than what was approved, a little more than what was approved on Winchester. The code is a guidance which cannot address every unique situation in the city. This is not Irvine or Santa Clarita. This is Glendale, where it's a historic city and the code, we have variances. So we're following the process, we're asking, we're saying, we're appealing that our project is reasonable development for the lot and for the street. If Mr. Medrano's house is reasonable, which would be 300 square feet, which is 300 square feet more than what we're asking for, I think our proposal could be considered reasonable. Next thing is hardship. One of the findings that you're required to identify as hardship, most people think hardship is financial, but in the terms of the variance, it's not. Last February, Mr. Garcia gave a presentation to the planning board about hardship, and it said physical disparity. I've heard that mentioned already today. Physical disparity of the lots on El Miradero. They're the same width, but they're shorter. That's clearly definable hardship. We have hardship, we have precedent, and we have the intention of the code, which is to allow reasonable development. Again, because the findings are what you're required to act upon, I've made what I feel are the findings. It's not in your package because, as I said, every week I read something new. Every week I learn something. So I'd like to share these suggested possible ways to consider that I feel the findings could be made for our application for a variance. One of the things I guess I haven't addressed is design and the second story. I overheard someone in the row behind me say, you can't stop them from a second story. Second story isn't prohibited by codes, and frankly, with the landscaping requirements that we have to meet, we have to go to a second story. Design elements, we will, under all circumstances, have to go to the design review board. It will be publicly aired and reviewed for the design, and all other code elements would apply. We'll put that 25-foot radius, we'll chop off a corner of the house, and, you know, we're looking to improve the neighborhood, to improve the situation, and to make a nice addition to the El Miradero neighborhood. Thank you.
Questions for the speaker? Just for that one. You can continue, but any questions for that speaker?
I have one question. Yeah.
Well, just a question for you right now.
You know, we're strictly talking about numbers here
Right.
at this point.
Right.
But as far as, I don't know if I ask you this question, I don't know if you want to touch on this, but the need for your expansion to put up this second story on your house.
Mm-hmm.
Do you care to elaborate on that? Why you need this extra 800 square foot space? What's the need?
The need is that we have a 2-year-old at home.
I'm sorry?
A 2-year-old at home.
Okay.
Our house is a small 2-bedroom, and we have an office in one of the bedrooms. I don't think that's illegal. I think I can do that, and our son sleeps in the dining room. So regardless of what is approved, we need to expand the house to have 3 bedrooms. Because of the landscaping and the smaller size of the lot, we really do have to go up. There's virtually no way to meet the 40% landscaping because with the garage in the back and the long driveway, we're forced to go up. Going up has some implications related to inefficiencies of use because now we have to put stairways, which are essentially lost usable living space, which we didn't have before. So it's just, that's the need.
My name is Tom Lebecki, and I'm the owner of the property. The question from the zoning has been addressed to me on many occasions. Why do we want to split this particular project into 2 phases, the garage and the house? The simple reason to do this is to really make it a lot easier on everyone. And it's an important element I'm supposed to bring up because let's say, if we're able to do the garage first, which we will have to do, whether the variance is granted or not, because we're going to go up to the second story anyway and expand the floor number. It was simply to just eliminate the movement of construction cars, split up into two phases where we don't have to remove the contents of the house and put it in a storage facility, to use the garage structure that would have been done previously in the first phase, and basically streamline the entire process. It all has to do about logistics, because now, whether we're going to get the 0.35 or whether we're just going to go with the 0.3, we're still going to have to do the garage. And what's going to happen? Now you're forcing the residents to really move the entire contents for the duration of the construction and back it up, make it extremely impractical just for everyone, including the neighbors. What my wife has mentioned about the hardship, which has never really been defined clearly to us, and there was some kind of, there was often misunderstanding regarding what hardship is. If we look at the intent of the code was really to eliminate the nonconformance. What has happened in 2004, and it's really important, I'm going to reiterate this thing, Winchester and El Miradero. We have one code that tries to eliminate nonconformity that's applied to the entire zone without really much focus being given to one side of Winchester and El Miradero, where their lots are much shallower. What happens as a consequence of this? Not only that the code does not eliminate nonconformity, they create new nonconformity on El Miradero. By applying this code in 2004, I don't know how many houses have been actually rendered nonconforming. Do we calculate this? 17 houses. And this is precisely the hardship that we're talking about. This is why El Miradero is different. This is why we're making a tremendous effort. Also, if people complain about the fact that this is a precedence, it's not a precedence. The precedence is Jackson. It's the other property. This has happened before. When there's a discussion here regarding the 25-foot radius, for instance, if we hit a 25-foot radius, we wouldn't have to apply for the administrative exception. That's the entire issue. That's the whole reason why we're here, to apply for the administrative exception. That's actually something that I have addressed to zoning many times after being told that I don't have to apply for it. It's due to our honesty that we have actually brought this process to zoning and explained to Mr. Baxter on several occasions that we need to do the administrative exception, because I was given a go-ahead on 3 occasions from planning to go ahead with the garage. And so what's going to happen is going to create really a different type of a hardship for all of us now, whether we do a 0.35 or a 0.3, because it's going to be a more messy construction. We won't have the garage facility to actually use it as storage in the interim time when we have to vacate the property and go into the construction of the main structure. It's going to be more difficult, more costly, and more detrimental to all of us. So I would like you to consider the logistics of those type of situations, because they're not easy, and what they do, they include many, many elements. It's an interactive game, in essence, where you have to consider different phases. For instance, water and power. We have been delayed with the administrative exception because we had to get an encroachment permit that originally we were told would take 3 weeks. It took actually 4 months. If you're talking about the precedence that is going to trigger other people to expand houses, if you look at our effort, we've been working on this with architects. It's not just the time; it's the financial expenditure from our end, not from the city, not from the neighbors. It's we have expedited thousands of dollars, probably over $20,000, and got nowhere. On top of it, we're sitting here this is the second year of deliberation. So if somebody suggests that this is going to trigger a massive application activity from the city of Glendale, I don't think that many people would be really ready to undergo the same process that we have done. It would be just impractical for anyone. So I would like you to consider this, and I think that's all from my end. Questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Not at this time, sir.
Thank you.
All right. We have several speaker cards. Andrea and Connie Humberger.
Do you have copies of our letter, or do we need to provide them?
That we previously got.
You have that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I'm not going to read the whole letter. I'm just going to highlight a few points. Basically, we've lived on El Miradero since 1966, and we, very much cherish its special character and characteristics that the other neighbors do. And we are against the issuance of the variance. We would like to see you sustain the zoning administrator's decision, because we do think that allowing a .35 FAR would set a precedent for our neighborhood. I understand the appellant is saying that there has been precedents in the city before, and that may be true. I'm not familiar with any of those details, but this would set a precedent on our street, and this is our street in our neighborhood, and this is what, we're very concerned about. We understand the need to expand a home for a growing family. We don't have anything against that. We don't oppose a second story, but what we do support is staying within the established guidelines. The anti-immaginization effort was something that we followed from the very beginning, and we've supported all along, and we just continue to support that. I just really want to say that, if your commission could not make the 4 findings for the decision, to support the .40 FAR, then I don't see how you can make the findings to support the .35, just like the zoning administrator couldn't do it for either level. So we just think that you need to, stick with the .35, stick with the .30, not support the .35. And we just don't want to have the precedent set in our neighborhood.
Questions for the speakers? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker card is Leslie Lundgren.
I am Leslie Lundgren, and I feel that you should uphold the variance to stay within the rules of the law at the .30 ratio. My sister lives in Glendale. They wanted to add on to their house. They happen to live in another area. They had a much larger lot, and they had to conform to the .30, and they had to change their plans, and when they added the family room and expanded their kitchen, they stayed within that law of the city of Glendale. And I think we should those are the reason why you have those laws, and we should stay and conform to it. And yes, they do have to go up to a second story, but then we also need to look at the land use too, and make sure that there's enough greenery also, because we need the oxygen level that the plants are putting out also. And so, but I do believe that they should stay with the .30. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And the last speaker card I have is Jonathan Barras.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Barras. I live at 1447 El Miradero Avenue in Glendale. I've lived there for almost 16 years with my wife and my daughter, and I'm a 17-year resident of Glendale. I'm here tonight because I oppose the granting of the variance. I have just 4 points to make. Number one, the applicants have had not one but 2 chances to go before the zoning administration and show that they could meet the 4 findings that are necessary to make the variance possible, to qualify for the variance. And on both occasions they failed, not just to make all 4, but to make a single one of the findings. I presume that some of the other variances that were listed a little bit earlier made some of the findings, or all of them. Number 2, we've been at this for the better part of a year now, and neither the staff or the applicants have come up with a variance that has occurred in the city that is of similar circumstance. In short, there is no precedent for this. And I think that if you look at this situation based upon just that, you can't grant the variance. Number 3, the variance language itself was placed in the ordinance to act as a safety valve. It's there so that the city can deal fairly and even-handedly with people who have some unfair encumbrance to their property. The hardship is a physical one to the property. The property has too steep a slope. It has too irregular a design or a shape. It has perhaps even protected oaks or a right-of-way for utilities that can't be changed. The variance was created for people who are in those kinds of hardship circumstances, not self-imposed hardships. The applicants merely want to build a bigger home and they don't want to stop at the legal limit. And I think if you look at this case based on that, you cannot grant the variance. The last point I want to make is, I'm a big boy, and I know that you have the power to say yes to this, and I can accept that. But I would suggest that if you're going to do that, you're going to change the law. You're going to effectively change the law. And I don't think this, with all due respect, is the right venue for that. If you feel inclined to do that, I say bump it right up to the city council. Let the city council debate the ordinance. Let the city council hold public debates and decide whether they should uphold the ordinance or modify it. I think that's the proper place to do that. If you do change the law today, then as sure as I'm standing here right now, somebody else is going to be standing in front of you, maybe not tomorrow, but at some other time, with a set of plans in one hand and a balled-up fist in the other, saying, I want my variance. And this time, I only want just .36 or .37. And how are you going to say no to that? How are you going to say no to the next one or the next one? So I urge you to say no to this right now, because the applicants can build legally almost another 500 square feet to their home. That seems fair and reasonable. That seems in accordance with the ordinance. That seems playing by the rules. And we've all played by the rules. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Questions for the speaker? All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. I have no other speaker cards. Closing comments from staff? Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. My mistake.
I have already introduced myself. I'd like to answer the concern that Mr. Barras addressed. It's very easy to say, give them the extra 500 feet that they're legally allowed. First of all, legally, we have the process that we have followed continuously, just the way it's designed in the city of Glendale. That's one thing. But, it's easy to say give them 300 feet or 500 feet, and also to attach all the other conditions that they are addressing at every public meeting. And those conditions are, let's keep the character of the house. Let's make it beautiful. Let's make it Spanish. Let's make it blend into the environment. If you talk to the architects, you'll know that all these elements are again, interactive. You can't just say to somebody, give them 500 feet, but make the house look beautiful. It's absurd. Because then you need to create a certain architecturally pleasing dwelling that's going to look right in the neighborhood on a given street. If you go through our paperwork, and my wife can refer you to the proper pages, we have analyzed in depth with precision, with architects, with two different architects, different scenarios about how to gain the 2 bedrooms and the 2 bathrooms upstairs. It's not that easy, quite frankly, with a .3. If the lot was bigger, I don't need more than 2,200 feet. I really don't. 2,200 and whatever it was, 50 feet or 2,240 feet. That number, it's not based on our appetite for space. It is simply based on the ergonomics and on the practical architectural issues of designing the house that's going to look right in this neighborhood and that's going to encompass what are we looking for. We're just looking for 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 bathrooms. If Mr. Barras can design this house for us by giving us the 500 feet or whatever it is that we are allowed to have right now, I'd be more than happy to turn the architectural fees to him and come up with a beautiful design for me. If you look at this rendering, the artist rendering of what we're planning to do in this neighborhood, and I think there's a copy in your document, please refer to this, and I dare somebody to tell me that this is not going to fit on El Miradero. This house is seamlessly designed as if it was designed in the 1920s to look precisely as if it was never even modified to any other architectural style. So,
I just have a couple more things. The discussion of precedents. If the way the council acts tonight, or the commission acts tonight, will set a precedent. And this is how. There are 18 houses that exceed the code. Mr. Medrano talked about growing old in his house. What happens when he needs to expand a bathroom on the first floor? Because he needs a wheelchair. He needs a larger shower. As I've been treated here, that would be considered a self-imposed hardship because I grew old. If any of these people need to expand their house for that type of reason, the precedent today would say no. If I can't get it because my 2-year-old's not a hardship, because I've been told my 2-year-old is self-imposed, because the lots are shorter, that doesn't count. If anybody comes here and says, my daughter is in a wheelchair, I need more room in my kitchen, and they're over the allowable FAR, I don't mean to be cruel, but I would have a very hard time with that. The findings are subjective. Findings are one of those things that maybe if the person who had reviewed North Jackson had reviewed my case, I would be in a different position. They're very subjective, and I just ask that you consider the case of the compatibility and reasonability, because that, to me, was the basis for the approval was reasonable in the neighborhood, and I think the square footage was asked for is a little less than 2,000. I think 2,200 square foot is reasonable and compatible with the neighborhood, and that's what the code allows us. We are following the rules. The rules allow us to be here. The rules allow us to make these applications. Thank you.
Any questions for the speaker? None at this time. Thank you. All right, now we'll go to closing comments from staff.
I have nothing to add.
All right, do we have any questions from the commission for staff? Any other questions or comments for any of the speakers?
This time.
All right, we'll close the public hearing. We'll enter deliberations, and I will look to the left this time.
Okay, I'll go. The design of the house, I agree with the opponent. Fits right into the neighborhood. Looking at it is beautifully designed. And then also, I heard your need for this expansion, which is, your growing family. But what I see is that you stated that you need a 3-bedroom, but this design is for 4-bedroom house, from what I see. And you also mentioned that you've explored all possibilities with your architect, and your architect has stated that you cannot come up with the design house with the allowable .30 variance. What I struggle with is that, yes, the house is very well designed, and it fits in the neighborhood. But the reason I think you are here before the commission is that you've been a long-time resident there, and you love the neighborhood. And I'm pretty sure you love your neighbors. And, you cannot ignore the voices of your neighbors. And you cannot ignore the guidance that was, whether it was implemented in 1990, whether it's implemented in 2004. The guidance is there to make sure that we control the area and the style of living that we enjoy here. So that's where I have difficulty in that. Yes, I love your house, I love your design and all that, but the rules are set, and it does change as times go, but it is there, it is set there because it's needed, and it was needed at the time, and it's needed now, although I sympathize with and I appreciate your design, I am agreeing with, your neighbor, in that I think there are many talented architects out there that could design your house with that, so that the garage could be designed for conformance, and your house could be modified to meet your need for 3 bedrooms. That's my opinion.
Mr. Berman?
No comment.
All right.
Mr. Schutz. Okay,
I'll try to make this brief. Based on some of the things that I said on the last issue, I have similar feelings about this variance. The appellant did mention when she was speaking about 40% of the houses on the block or in the neighborhood are non-conforming. To me, that's why I want to uphold variances, because if we didn't put something in place, it maybe wouldn't have stopped at 40, it would have went to 100 or whatever, just as an example. Just like the gray box. We have a lot of gray boxes in this city that I wish and many of us wish we would have never allowed to happen. It's not a perfect process, and it took dozens and dozens of people and hundreds of hours to try to come up with something. And I don't know how you can make the process perfect. It took all those people many years to put the standards in place for the right reasons, I think. So I don't have any more.
Okay, just making sure you had ended the sentence. That's fine.
I don't have any more.
Mr. Torgerson.
Thank you.
well, as sympathetic as I am with the appellant, I was involved in a lot of the footwork that went into the change in the municipal code for the floor area ratio and for the elimination of the 2,200 square foot minimum. And the intent of the large working group we had that came up with these code changes over the years was to precisely what Mr. Schutz had said about if 40% in the neighborhood are non-conforming by this law, we're putting the law in to keep it from becoming 100%. So I would have a hard time making finding D, the granting of the variance, will be not be contrary to the objectives of the ordinance, because I was there and that's what I believe the objectives of the ordinance, floor area ratio ordinance was, or were, the objectives were, as well as the elimination of the 2,200 square foot. So I couldn't make that finding. The exceptional circumstances or conditions to the property, that's always a iffy one, because it talks about that the circumstances do not apply generally to other properties in the same zone or neighborhood. After a lot of discussions with the city attorney over the last number of years about this particular process, or this particular finding, I have to agree with the one speaker that the intent of that safety valve was exactly that. If there was a particularly weird-shaped lot in a neighborhood, you can't make a code that's going to cover everything. Now, if the city council and the planning department missed the fact that this entire area has one little street with weird lots, then maybe they could consider rezoning. But the fact that every single lot in the neighborhood is the same, there's no exceptional circumstance that I could find for this particular property compared to the other lots in the neighborhood. So I couldn't make the second finding either, unfortunately. And that's enough to not be able to. I could talk about not making the first finding, but about hardship, but get into a debate with Mr. Garcia, and I'll avoid that at the moment.
All right. Well, unfortunately for the appellant, but regardless, I agree with virtually every one of the comments that my fellow commissioners have made. I think the problem that I see, and just in walking the neighborhood, for example, and just looking at the general size of the homes, is it's a tale of two sides of a street. That if this property, by a fluke of nature, was on the other side of the street, it would be far more defensible to look at changing the floor area ratio simply because of the character of the homes that are on that side of the street. The side of the street they're on, however, generally represent smaller homes, and I just kind of feel that that the appellant is overreaching a little bit in terms of adding 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and they might have to settle for a 3-bedroom home with some sort of modification to try to fit within what they would normally be permitted at the .30. So that said,
It's not a 4-bedroom design.
well, however you're modifying it.
It doesn't matter, but
Right.
I just wanted that clarified.
Okay. The idea of adding the 2 bedrooms and the 2 baths on the second floor is overreaching. I'll just clarify it that way. That said, those are my comments, those are my opinions. I would vote to sustain the denial, and I'll ask for a motion.
I move that we sustain the denial.
We've got a little verbiage that might be nice
I'm gonna
to
do
use
that.
please.
I move that upon review and consideration of all the materials and exhibits of current record relative to standards variance case number PVR 2007-047 remanded, located at 1449 El Miradero, and after having conducted an appeal hearing on said matter, that the Planning Commission hereby sustains the zoning administrator's decision and denies said variance case, said standards variance case number PVAR 2007-047 in accordance with the findings set forth on the decision letter of October 15th, 2008.
A motion seeking support?
Second.
Motion and a second. Please call roll.
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
Aye, and a vote of 5-0, PVAR 2007-047. The zoning administrator's denial was sustained. Any party unsatisfied with the decision has 15 days to appeal to the Planning Commission. Did we verify what that means with the holidays?
It's
Mr.
15 days. If the 15th day falls on the holiday, Mr. Chair, then they get 1 extra day. And my understanding is the 15th day would fall on January 1st, so the appeal will be due January 2nd.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I'm prepared to move on to the next agenda item, or does anybody need a short break?
I'd take a very short break.
All right, we're going to adjourn, we'll adjourn for 3 to 5 minutes and come back into session.
Okay, we're on.
Yeah, this is the color printer.
We're back.
There's one on the nicer glossy.
Gentlemen, we're live. All right, we're back in session with the December 17th regular meeting of the Planning Commission, and we're going to move on to agenda item. No, there was an agenda here. I've got it. Agenda item 8A, new business. These are proposed Art Even Highlands Historic District. It's a recommendation to City Council regarding the request for establishment of a historic overlay zone. Staff is represented by Jay Platt.
Tonight, you're considering 2 of the city's proposed historic districts. Just to give you a little context, back in August, you considered the Royal Boulevard Historic District, which you did recommend to City Council for designation, and subsequently Council designated that in October. Tonight, you're hearing 2 districts. I'd like to just show you this flow chart so you get a sense of where we are in the process. This applies to both the Art Even District, the Art Even Highlands District is the official name, and just so you know, the official pronunciation appears to Art Even Highlands, but I'm having trouble getting that in my head. So, but the Planning Commission is an integral part of this process because all of our historic districts are officially overlay zones, so it represents a zone change to the city zoning map. And you're actually the second to last step in the process. You're making a recommendation to City Council whether or not to designate this district. The district of Art Even Highlands is located in northwest Glendale, you can see in the circle, and specifically encompasses 87 homes, primarily along Art Even and Highland Avenues, but also several homes on Cumberland and Mountain Street. So it's very hard to remember Art Even.
I am not going to criticize you on pronunciation.
Thank you.
Let's just make that clear.
So you see the proposed designation. If you remember back to 2004 when the city was considering a historic district for Cumberland Heights, you'll see that Ardevine Highlands represents kind of the northeast portion of that, and you're only considering these 87 homes that the proponents subsequently nominated after the city changed its historic district process, developed a new historic district ordinance, as well as guidelines that will help us when we have the designated districts in terms of applicants making proposals for changes to houses. The 87 houses represent excellent examples of several of the period revival styles from the 1920s and 30s. There's an especially good representation of Spanish colonial revival, but also Tudor revival, American colonial revival. There are also minimal traditional homes, and the date ranges go from 1903 through 1955 for the proposed district and its period of significance. Several of the houses have extra significance that have already been recognized by the city. The Ardevine house was the home of Dan Campbell and his family. He was a partner with Leslie Brand in the numerous ventures. The Campbells are, very important early family in Glendale. Part of the land in the proposed district was on land owned by this family, and the house Ardevine is actually on the Glendale Register as well as the National Register, and it's in the proposed district. Dan Campbell's brother Arthur also had two houses in the district that are also included under this proposal. Previously, the city commissioned an independent consultant to do a historic resource report for this district, which is part of our historic district process. And the consultant found that the district meets 3 of the 8 criteria that we have for historic districts. Criterion A, that it exemplifies special elements, primarily of the social, aesthetic, and architectural history of the city. Criterion B, that it's identified with people who've been significant to our history, primarily the Campbell family. And criterion G, that it reflects significant patterns of development, especially distinctive examples of community planning. Under our ordinance, district only needs to meet 1 of these criteria. The consultant found that it met 3, and the Historic Preservation Commission, which has reviewed this district at several points over the last year, concurred that these 3 criteria have been met. Another significant aspect of the survey that's done is to look at the houses themselves and determine whether they still maintain the character and the historic kind of integrity that would allow them to be contributing members to a historic district. 68 of the 87 homes, which is 78%, were found to be contributors. The ordinance requires that 60% be, so we are over that benchmark of 60%. And then finally, there's a very strong component of public input into the historic districting process, and that was done purposefully by City Council to ensure that at all times as we move through this relatively long process, it's been taking 15 to 18 months so far for districts, that we're constantly coming back to the people and making sure that we have the support in the area so that we can move forward with the knowledge that we're not doing this, forcing this on a neighborhood. In the case of Ardevine Highlands, we received a petition on November 13th. 65 out of the 87 homes have signed the petition. That's 75%. The ordinance requires at this point that 50+% sign the petition. And you should know that the petition is still in circulation. So anytime up to the City Council hearing, which is now scheduled for January 27th, we may get some more signatures on the petition, so that percentage may change before City Council. And something important to note, given that when we looked at Royal Boulevard, there was an opposition petition that had been submitted. To date, there's been no official petition or any other significant opposition that's arisen at any of the public meetings that we've had for this district. So unless you have any other questions for your consideration.
Questions from the commission? Oh, all right. I actually have a question, and perhaps the speakers, if they're involved with it, might address that as well. Obviously, you're not going to get 100% participation in anything. A certain percentage, less than 100%, is just apathetic, and there's a percentage that's going to be opposed. In terms of negative comments, opposition, what have you heard? What seems to be the concern?
For this proposed district, we haven't heard any significant opposition. There's one homeowner who came to a couple of the public meetings that we've had, more expressing concern about some of the regulations once a district is designated in terms of how the guidelines are going to affect how she would be able to make changes to her house. We've had many discussions back and forth. She hasn't come to any of the recent hearings. I can't say that her opposition has changed or not. But compared to what we've experienced with more formal opposition, hers was not as, vehement, not as philosophically based as we sometimes hear. So in the case of Ardevin Highlands, where we have 87 homes, which is the largest district proposed so far, you can see no one has come forward from those 87 homes expressing significant opposition.
All right, and in terms of district size, Royal was how many?
30 houses.
30. What's your general feeling, and I guess you can say it's going to be specific on each one, 87 homes is a fairly significant number. Do you think that's kind of approaching the outer limits of a historical district? Or?
Definitely not if we look at examples in other cities where you can have hundreds, in some cases thousands of homes in a historic district. I think there was a sense as the city was cautiously moving forward with districts that the residents in the areas were kind of taking smaller steps to consider how the neighborhood would look. Obviously, Cumberland Heights was determined to be eligible under the previous ordinance. That was about 500 and some homes, 550 or so.
And in terms of process, if, let's say, if another block down decides to go for it, can they be annexed into the historical district at some point in the future?
Yeah, it could be. There could be an application process that would allow that.
All right, thank you. Any initial questions for staff? All right, we'll go to the speaker cards. And by the way, I really appreciate people are now learning my pronunciation challenges, and they're putting phonetics on here. Temi Retier, Temi Retier. Even when it's phonetics, I don't pay attention.
Actually, I did not know that. It's just that my last name is a little unusual to pronounce, so I always spell it phonetically to help everyone out. I am Tammy Relier. I am one of the...
Oh, that's an L still. Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm blaming the handwriting. All right, but go ahead.
I am one of the lead applicants on the Ardevin Highlands Historic District, and I'm really glad to be here. And I can't believe that we're here at this last leg, so to speak, before we go to City Council. As you can see by Jay's presentation, we have far exceeded the minimum threshold each step of the way. In fact, we are still working, even though we're at 75% of the homeowners that have signed, we are still working with neighbors and hopefully get to a higher percentage by City Council. So things are moving positively. So I won't take up too much of your time. I just would like to say I hope you support the recommendation to move forward. This is a beautiful and unique area. It's one of the reasons my husband and I, 7 years ago, moved to the Northwest Glendale, because we never have seen anything like this in Los Angeles County. So once again, I thank you for your consideration, and we hope that you would approve it and move it to the last step. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? No. Thank you very much. Cindy Soldwettel.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Sodwettel, and that's another tough to pronounce name. My husband and I are also applicants to the Ardevin. That's hard for me too.
Now you're just trying to make me feel better.
Proposed Historic District, and I ask that this commission recommend to City Council that they approve our district. And I'll just make 3 quick points. The district is very deserving of protection and designation as a historic district. It's been recognized as so by the Historic Preservation Commission, who's voted twice unanimously with glowing reviews about our district, its integrity, the quality of the homes there, and the quality of the neighborhood as a whole, by the Historical Society, as well as publications such as Los Angeles Magazine, which voted the greater Cumberland Heights area one of the greatest neighborhoods in the LA area that no one knew about. I think they know about us now. And we have received overwhelming support of our neighbors. And to respond to your question about who the 25% that we haven't reached yet, I can speak for Highland, which we have 80% support. There's a house in foreclosure. There are a couple within the district not reachable. There are people who won't answer the door, won't respond to notes, or anyway, just don't want to be involved in any way, shape, or form. And there are some opponents. They tend to either be in the building trades or they tend to be libertarian-type people. Some of those people have been here 30 or 40 years and would, really benefit from the district, but they, don't support it. There's been no formal opposition submitted. It's a great thing for our neighborhood. It's brought together a diverse group of neighbors, young and old, and of every ethnicity of the city, for a great cause, and united us in support of protecting our neighborhoods. So I ask that you support us and recommend to council that we receive our district. Thank you very much, and have a happy holidays.
Thank you. The last speaker card I have on this item is Elaine Wilkerson.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Elaine Wilkerson. I'm a proud owner of a house in our first historic district, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. You have before you a letter from our president, John Locascio, very much in support of this application and the next one, and I needn't speak on the next one. I'm going to save you the moments. We just like to encourage you to proceed, and I'll remind you in this particular one that the original Cumberland Heights area, which is a larger area than this proposed district, first came to the city in 2002, and they were the beginning of the changes to the ordinances. And if any group has shown staying power, I'd say they have, and Tammy Relier particularly, because that's how I met her, and they're a friend, and she's really a hero in this effort. And I thank you for your time, and please put the two letters in the record, one in each item. Thank you.
All right, very good. Any other comments from staff before we close the public hearing?
No comments.
All right, public hearing's closed. Whether I opened it or not is a subject of dispute. In any event, comments from commissioners. We'll start on the right.
I don't have anything to add. I think it's a great deal that we're moving these items along. I was pleased to see the Royal area start out, and I think that this can lead to nothing but good for the whole community and sustain some parts of our community that can't be replicated and represent what Glendale is about and its history from the beginning as a city. So pretty much all I have to say.
Mr. Torgerson.
I agree 100% with all of that, and I have the motion in front of me ready to read it after the subsequent comments.
Got plans later this evening? Mr. Lee.
I see the pride in today's speakers, and also I'm all for the preservation and heritage, history. So I'm all for it.
Okay. Mr. Berman.
I have to go down Kenneth Road for pills. At my age, it's the most beautiful drive around Cumberland.
Keeps your blood pressure down.
Yeah, very beautiful area there.
All right. My only comments are it's just a joy to keep going through this historical district process. To me, the most fun is to read the history of the neighborhoods. The thing that was put together for Royal and this one, and as well as for Cottage Grove, it's just very informative.
That's a good point. I keep these.
Yeah, so do I. Yep. It's just really cool and a great tool for the teachers, I would think, within the school district to make use of these. So without further ado, would someone like to make a motion that we heartily recommend the district to council?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion.
Please.
Second.
Well, we did. There we go. You're the one that wanted to get out of here. We have a motion, we have support, that we recommend the historical, the Ardevine.
Ardevine.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Are you going to have like a little pronunciation in the front? That we recommend the council. Could you call a roll, please?
Commissioner Sheets.
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lee.
Aye.
Commissioner Berman.
Aye.
And Chair King.
Aye. On a unanimous vote, Planning Commission recommends City Council accept the request for establishment of a historic overlay zone in Ardevine. And that thing we were just talking about. All right, enough tomfoolery. Let's move on to 8B, proposed Cottage Grove Historic District. Mr. Platt.
Cottage.
Cottage.
I was going to say, we have easier pronunciation.
And Grove.
Grove.
Mr. Platt.
We're at the same point in the process, obviously, with Cottage Grove, the proposed historic district at the foot of Adams Hill. You see it here on the map. You just recommended forwarding the largest proposed historic district thus far, and now you're considering the smallest historic district proposed thus far. We're looking at 14 houses on Cottage Grove Avenue, pretty much covering both sides of the street between just below Palmer and then down to Green. And what's interesting about Cottage Grove is we kind of have a unique history here where the initial developer in the mid-20s had an idea that we were going to have an English village kind of atmosphere in this part of South Glendale, and the goal was to create a village of English cottages. Well, that didn't necessarily transpire exactly as he expected, but of the 14 homes, we have 9 really nice examples of small-scale Tudor Revival houses of varying shapes and sizes, but you can see there's a nice continuity in the architectural styling of these houses. Mixing in with those, we have 3 Spanish Colonial Revival houses, which is very typical of Glendale development in the 20s. And then we have one house in the center at the bottom, which is actually a folk Victorian farmhouse that was owned by Helene Ungerland, who owned the entire tract that later became Cottage Grove. So that's included as part of the Cottage Grove district because it's significant to that history through the development. And then we have one house in the lower right corner from 1938, which is a nice example of the minimal traditional style, but because it's so far outside of the area's period of development, which is kind of really concise. Besides the 1901 house, everything was built between 1925 and 1928, so it's a very tight development area. So as we move forward, we had the consultant do the same thing with the historic resource report. They found that the Cottage Grove district meets 2 of the criteria. Criterion G, similar to last time, that it reflects a distinctive example of community planning in Glendale. And then because we have this kind of unusually cohesive grouping of Tudor revivals, the street conveys a sense of the historic and architectural cohesiveness through, I would say, design, setting, and workmanship. Let's throw materials in there, too. So, I'm losing. There we go. Just to show you the contributing status of the houses. I don't think we're going to be able to expect this high a number in most of the historic districts we'll be considering over the years, but because only one of the 14 houses is a non-contributor, we have 93% contributing status, and as I mentioned before, 60% is the threshold the ordinance requires. And then again, there was a lot of the public input. The second petition, which is officially the petition requesting that the city designate the district through the overlay zone change, came to us on November 17th. 12 out of the 14, the owners of 12 out of the 14 houses signed the petition. That's 86%. And again, we didn't have any significant opposition in this district. In fact, we've heard no opposition from anyone living within the district. So our staff recommendation, again, is to recommend this to City Council for the overlay change.
Thank you. Any questions of staff at this moment? Seeing none. First speaker card is Ute Baum.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Ute Baum. I'm one of the applicants for the proposed Cottage Grove Historic District. We're now in the home stretch, finally, after many meetings, lots of work by lots of people, lots of signatures and lots of research, as well as the survey, which was done by the outside firm. Your recommendation to move ahead you're the second to the last step for us to become a historic district. So your recommendation to move ahead is very important, as was the recommendation of the Historic Preservation Commission, which was done last week. So we love our little street with our clutch of Tudor-style homes, and there's only 14 of them, but we're proud as punch to live in the street. We want to preserve. I want to look down out of my kitchen window, Cottage Grove, and just see it for the rest of my life the way, not really, but you know what I mean. So I hope you will recommend it onto City Council, and We're scheduled for sometime in January, the end of January, and will be the third one in Glendale. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Nunez.
My name is Federico Nunez. I live at 1212 Cottage Grove. And all I want to say is that I agree with her, what all she said. Maybe I didn't understand everything. But we all stick together in our little community there. It's a small street, but we all know each other. We support each other. And I would just love to have my family back east, south, west, to know that we got our historical community. I thank you very much for listening to me. Feliz Navidad.
Thank you.
Same to you.
And the last speaker card is Elaine Wilkerson. Certainly.
That's what I said before.
Ditto? Okay, let the record show. All right, comments from Commissioner, nothing, no closing comments from staff, I presume? Comments from, public hearing open and closed? All right. Comments from Commissioners. Mr. Berman?
I used to date my wife 62 years ago in a house just like those. So I'm for it.
Good. Glad that worked out. Mr. Lee?
Well, she said ditto, so I would say ditto.
Ditto. Mr., I guess we'll go with Mr. Torgerson.
Oh, I'm ready to make a motion as soon as Mr. Sheets
All right, Mr. Sheets?
How much time do you have? Same for this, I think this whole process is a positive thing for the city, and I'm ready to support it.
Again, just what we said in the previous case, great prospects, great process, rather, and look forward to supporting it. So please make the motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we recommend to the City Council that this be the Cottage Grove Historic District be created.
Support, please.
I second.
Motion and support, call roll.
Commissioner Sheets,
Aye.
Commissioner Torgerson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lee,
Aye.
Commissioner Berman,
Aye.
Mayor King.
Aye, on a unanimous 5-0 vote, Planning Commission enthusiastically recommends that City Council adopt the Cottage Grove Historic District. And Planning Department updates, agenda item 9.
Yeah, we have quite a few meetings that have gone on. We have the transfer of BZA duties permanently to the Planning Commission scheduled for City Council on January 13th for ordinance introduction. We also have zoning code amendments that you saw last month, and that's scheduled for ordinance introduction at Council on January 20th. And then you also heard a use variance discussion. That use variance ordinance is now scheduled to be brought before Council on February 17th. And also, we have the housing element. The housing element is back for a joint Housing Authority City Council meeting on January 27th at 2:30 in the afternoon. And then probably our biggest news is that the council authorized the Planning Department to start an effort to create a North Glendale Community Plan. And starting in January, we'll be going out and doing public outreach, especially with business community and property owners up in the North Glendale community. So we'll definitely be giving you periodic updates, and when we start having our advisory committee, we will definitely be asking you to appoint a member to be on our committee and help advise us on that. And as far as future meetings go, we do have a meeting that is normally scheduled for January 7th. That's been canceled, but we will have a regular meeting on January 21st. And then we also have a special Joint Transportation and Parking Commission for Monday, January 26th, and that would start at 6 p.m. So that...
And that will be in council chambers or here?
It's going to be in, at this time, we're looking at having it in this room, just because there's more room for you and also more room for exhibits.
Mm-hmm. All right. Comments from commissioners? Seeing none, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're adjourned.